My grandfather? Oh, yeah.
Welcome those on the recording. We'll be getting going here in just a few minutes.
I'm really afraid of him because of the explosion of mustard gas. He was paralyzed. He didn't have any leg. He was in a wheelchair, so he scared me to death. And by that time, his age, he wasn't a very pleasant fellow. He wasn't a real happy camper when he got older. Yeah, he was, from a kid's perspective, he was very mean.
Good morning, folks. That is too loud, isn't it? Is that loud or not? I can hear myself, so I'm going to turn it. No? Okay. All right, hopefully, okay, that's at least a little better, for me at least. I don't know, it's that thing where you can kind of hear yourself as you're talking. So we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a minute. So this is your focus morning, I suppose. I know we still have some folks coming in. The preacher must have gone wrong or something today. Not that I would know anything about that. You know, you're not the first person who's shown me one of those. I don't know. They might be family promise. Maybe. I don't know. They could also be great prospects, folks. I'm not sure. I didn't get one in my box, so I have no idea. All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Now, as a way of introduction, I must say that today's class, love it or hate it, is Andy's fault. When he heard last week that Pastor Jordan and I realized, well, Pastor Jordan's not going to be here, and Pastor Jordan teaches a Bible study. Someone needs to teach that Bible study. We came to this realization just before the early service last week, and Andy suggested that I take this up as the topic. This is in some ways an extension of the class I taught a couple weeks ago, right at the end of September, Angelology, right? It is not one-for-one connected, but it's certainly in that same realm. So really we have one umbrella topic, which you'll see on the front of your page there, that is spiritual warfare. And then the one that you're, I'm sure, far more interested in, if you're anything like anyone I've ever met, demonic possession is the second half of this class. But we can't, I understand, we cannot start there. I know it's far more exciting, but as I told my Wednesday night class when I had mentioned that this was my topic, it's probably not going to be as exciting as you want it to be. No spinning heads, no pea soup, none of that kind of stuff.
We don't want to clean up anymore.
Right, absolutely, that's good. And quite frankly, the first line on my notes, you don't have this on yours, right? I have the instructor notes, is desensationalizing spiritual warfare. So not only possession, but all of spiritual warfare. Because if you're anything like me, when you think spiritual warfare, you perhaps get these grandiose images of clandestine battles over your soul, which you have some level of involvement in, right? Angels and demons battling it out to the end. And that's not a completely wrong way to think about spiritual warfare. It's not necessarily a helpful way to think about spiritual warfare. In general, spiritual warfare is far less sensational than we think it may be. That doesn't mean it's not important. That doesn't mean it's not a critical and important thing that we have going on in our lives. Not that it's a worthwhile topic. It just isn't. It isn't, J.J. Abrams, flashing lights, camera flare, all that kind of stuff. So, also, before we really dive into this, we want to kind of set two, perhaps, boundaries for our conversation. These are kind of two errors that we can fall into that throughout this class we want to avoid. The first is one that I think is probably less of an issue in our circles here, but is worth mentioning, and that is this idea that the devil isn't real. Like I said, this is probably not as much of an issue for us, although I'm certain there is still some level or human nature in us that sometimes can doubt the existence of the devil, the demons, and all of that sort of thing. But we want to recognize that, yes, in fact, the devil is a very real entity, and he is warring against us, right? It's called spiritual warfare for a reason. And so, on the one end, we want to avoid denying the existence of evil. Let's just say in a more general term. More specifically, we want to avoid denying the existence of the devil. On the other end, the other error is to recognize that the devil, while he exists, while he is present, while he is doing things, is not in control. Nor has he ever been in control. Right? Not of your life, not of the great cosmic story of history. The devil is not in control, nor has he ever been in control. And this is the error that I think we are far more likely, at least in this room, to fall into. Right? Seeing the devil around every corner, under every rock. In fact, I have an example, and perhaps you won't kind of send your mind in this direction because of the way I prefaced this. This morning I went and grabbed all the stacks for you of the handouts to hand out to you. I had printed them out beforehand. And in that mailbox, my notes were not there. Which didn't surprise me. I didn't think that they were in there. I thought they were on my desk. I couldn't find them. Now, it's very likely that I didn't print those, or that I just misplaced them randomly. However, when I went onto my computer, right, I got the save file, no problem, opened up Spiritual Warfare Instructor Notes, and you know what I saw? Those little text squares of an unreadable document. And I went, oh no. But fortunately, I was able to recover mine. But the temptation there is to say, oh, the devil doesn't want me talking about him, and he scrambled my files. Is that possible? Perhaps. But is that going to be my assumption? No. My assumption is that I did something wonky when I saved the file, and Word was just being Word, and it did weird things, right? So we want to avoid saying, right, the devil's everywhere, he's controlling everything. And so these are kind of our two boundaries. The devil exists, but the devil isn't everywhere, right? There are sinful things that happen in this world that are not the responsibility of the devil. Do you know whose responsibility they are? That's right, yours. Great. Well done. Evil exists in the world, and the devil is not the sole cause of that evil. So we want to avoid kind of those two extremes as we talk about spiritual warfare. But let's consider both of them as we kind of transition into kind of our conversation from. Which of those two extremes, which of those two errors doesn't exist and is everywhere, suits the devil's purposes?
Yes.
Yes, right? And so here's how we're actually going to begin. We're going to begin by asking ourselves, or we're going to take this whole thing apart, kind of brick by brick. And we're going to do that starting by asking ourselves the question, what is the goal of the devil? What is his end game, if you will? Now, we might be tempted to say, oh, well, the devil wants us to worship him, right? I mean, I'm certain the devil would be happy if we were worshiping him, but we need to recognize that that's not actually the goal of the devil. That's not actually Satan's goal. If he can get you to worship him, great, but that is not his end goal. The end goal of the devil is, quite frankly, easier than that. He doesn't have to convince you that he is the one that needs to be worshipped. No, the goal of the devil is to get you to fear, love, and trust in anything or anyone that isn't God. Right? You'll recognize the catechism connection here, right? I keep telling my confirmands that yes, the small catechism does come up after confirmation. I don't think I've convinced them just yet, but we'll get them there eventually. The goal of the devil is to get you to fear, love, and trust in anything or anyone that is not the one true God. Right? So does it suit the devil's purpose if you worship the devil? This is the easy one, guys. Yes, of course it does, right? Does it suit the devil's purpose if you worship money, right? That's a big idol in our society. Absolutely, right? Let's trust in the almighty dollar rather than God. Perhaps this is jumping a little ahead. Does it suit the devil's purpose to convince you of the presence, the close presence of ghosts and your ability to communicate with them? Well, we'll see as we go on. Yes, it absolutely does. Right? Any way that the devil can use to get you, again, to fear, love, and trust in anything, whatever it is, even if it's a good gift of God, right? God can get you to trust in your family, your spouse, more than God, he's on board with that. Right? And so we recognize that both of these boundaries, right? The devil doesn't exist, well, then his attacks are real easy. Right? If you don't know where the attack's coming from, it can do more damage, right? Or the devil's everywhere, and we are now in terror, where, to use one version of the definition of the word, we fear the devil so much that we're incapacitated. Either of these extremes suits the devil's purpose of, again, getting you to fear, love, and trust in anything other than God. So questions about the purpose, the goal of the devil, and what he's up to. Yes, sir.
Quick example of that question. Our bank is issuing new credit cards for security purposes to everybody. I get my security card and the code is 666.
Oh, that one freaks people out, right?
The fact is, 666, if I just ignore it and say it's nothing to it,
Right, so
that would be the right thing, right?
Absolutely. So for what it's worth, I can piggyback on this with two examples. One, I had a manager while I worked in a theater that if her total came up to any combination that had a 666 in it, she bought something else or she returned something. So it's to remove that. Now, she wasn't a believer, so why she was doing this, I'm not entirely sure. But again, that kind of goes into that goal of the devil, right? Additionally, and I found this entertaining, perhaps. You can take from this what you will. For the National Youth Gathering, every church is given a church ID, a congregation ID. This is to help with the massive organizational undertaking that is organizing the National Youth Gathering. I don't remember, it's a 6-digit code. I don't remember the first 3 digits, but I'll give you 2 guesses as to what the last 3 digits of our congregational ID was. That's right, 666. There was something poetic there during certain moments of planning the National Youth Gathering. But, right, the number 666 is not inherently evil, right? No number, for that matter, is inherently evil. However, right, my manager that had made a superstition about it. That's problematic, right? Now here we go, confirmation stuff. That's really very near, if not a breaking of which commandment? Well, yes, the first is always the first. So there's a more specific one, though. The third commandment, right? The prohibition against witchcraft, superstition, those sorts of things, right? And so to say, so 666 is an evil number, well, we got some third commandment issues going on with that, right? So yes, absolutely go, that's a 3-digit number, and just move on. It doesn't mean that the devil has marked your credit card or anything nearly so nefarious, right? Again, we want to desensationalize spiritual warfare, right? So the fact that you have 666 on your credit card, or I had 666, or we all did, I suppose, on our congregational ID for the National Youth Gathering, doesn't mean that the devil has made his mark. Right? And quite frankly, the National Youth Gathering was a wonderful experience for everyone involved, at least as far as I'm aware. I think it was a great event and a place of growth for our youth. And so if the devil was trying to get in with our congregational ID, he did a poor job, quite frankly. But no, I do know people who get spooked about those sorts of things. Good. Anything else before we kind of dive a little bit more deeply into this? All right. So we know the goal of the devil: to get you to fear, love, and trust in anything or anyone other than God. So how does the devil accomplish this? We've already talked about some of the ways, but I want to, rather than specific examples, because we'll be here all day, kind of give you three broad categories. The three ways, again, broadly speaking, and this is my list, I didn't find this in a wholly dogmatic book or anything like that. The three ways that the devil accomplishes this goal of removing you from fear, love, and trust in God. The first is through the temptation to sin. Right? So this is the classic, the devil whispering in your ear, tempting you to sin. Now, it's probably worth mentioning it here, but we'll probably talk about this later on. The devil doesn't make you sin, right? The devil tempts you to sin, but we need to be very clear that the devil finds a very willing and ready ally in your sinful flesh. The devil is tempting you to sin, but the old Adam in you also really wants to sin. So that we can't say, oh, the devil made me do it, I can't be held responsible, right? No, the devil is tempting you to be sure, but your sinful flesh is also a temptation. And so again, it's desensationalize all of this. So the first way the devil accomplishes this is through the temptation to sin. The second is through the terror of death. So we'll see that not only in this idea of despair specifically, which is despair, by the way, the kind of old use of that word is losing your faith on your deathbed. That's why Luther prays, lead us not into despair. That's keep us in the faith at the last, right? And so there's especially, and you kind of see that demonic attack tends to pick up around and near death. When people are approaching death, there's all these temptations to fear death, right? And again, it's very easy for us to make death a god, right? And I don't mean that in that we worship death. Although there are some people, there are death cults out there. But again, desensationalize. If you fear death more than you trust God, that's the problem, right? Remember, Christ, kind of a big line share of what Jesus did and what his work is all about is defeating death. And so to fear death more than you trust in Christ and his work, well, that's a first commandment problem. The devil is leading you away into that fear of death. Ghosts and specters and things like this will also kind of fall into this category. Now, just because I mentioned it, and I want to make sure I hit it, and I don't think I have a bullet point for it, ghosts are not real. There are potentially one exception to this, and that is when Samuel pops up in 2 Samuel, 1 Kings. He pops up somewhere. The citation is lost on me. When Saul goes to the witch of Endor, and Samuel shows up, and the witch of Endor freaks out because Samuel actually showed up. That's maybe an exception, but not really. Ghosts don't exist. When you're dead, you are dead. Until Jesus raises you from the dead, you don't come back as a specter. Now, we'll just table this for a moment. I'm going to mention it. Do people see ghosts? Absolutely they do. My guess as to what they're seeing, what was the witch of Endor expecting to show up when she summoned something? It's a demon pretending to be a ghost or Samuel. Again, what's the goal? Let's trust in that. Distract. All those sorts of things. So, ghosts are not real. Demons are, and demons can pretend to be things. So, I've opened a can of worms. Go.
I was just wondering, though, the one other time that I can think of that you have these kind of dead people appear, the transfiguration, you have Moses alive.
Yes.
Holy Ghosts?
No. No, actually we can speak specifically about the transfiguration And this may feel dogmatic just because it's ripped out of paper. Moses and Elijah are preemptively glorified. And so what you're seeing is the resurrected Moses and Elijah in resurrection glory. What really this is a lot of ways to explain something that happened once and we have no real context for. But we recognize that they were really there, but that was a resurrection thing, not a ghost thing. But you're right. There is more than just Samuel and kind of dead people in the Bible doing things. But Samuel's the only one that we can't point to something different. And by the way, I have some books that, if you are interested, I can give you the title of them by Dr. Bennett. I went to one of his presentations, and he did this whole "there are no ghost" things. And I went up to him and I said, "What about Samuel?" And he said, "Read my book. It's in there." It wasn't there. He never talked about that. He just didn't want to answer my question. Anyway, that's neat. Either that or I completely missed it. It is entirely possible. So, temptation to sin, terror of death, and prideful idolatry. Right? So this is trusting in yourself, trusting in any sort of idol. This is kind of sin of pride stuff going on here. And we'll talk about why I phrase these things the way I have when we talk about how we fight spiritual warfare. But temptation to sin, terror of death, and prideful idolatry are kind of three ways that we can think of that the devil and his minions, right, are attempting to accomplish this goal of keeping you from fearing, loving, and trusting in God. Questions?
Just an observation. I think some of especially for Christians, the strongest attack is when he excuses or accuses us.
Yes, and we'll get to that, but more specifically, but what he's saying there, right, is kind of the Adam and Eve, right? Oh, that's not really a sin. That's the excuses. Or the accusers. How could you have done that? Absolutely. So those are more particular forms of that attack. Absolutely. And those are the ones, like you said, especially for Christians, that really can rip at us. Yes, you had one.
Oh, what kind of idolatry?
Prideful idolatry. So I guess I'll give away why I'm doing this in a set of three. Because what I will say, and this is a little bit more kind of focused, is that spiritual warfare, the way we fight back in three areas: sin, death, and the devil, right? And so these I finagled to fit in that same category of sin, death, and the devil. So that's why we have these categories. I'm trying to make it all fit. Nice connections and parallels, that sort of thing. So the goal of the devil is to get you to fear, love, and trust in anything but him. This is accomplished through temptation to sin, terror of death, and prideful idolatry. And what are the means? Right? So these are the big categories. What is the actual working of Satan to get to accomplish these goals? Right? So the first, we'll just go in the order I wrote them down. Well, I probably should have switched it, but we'll just do it this way. First is the terror of the demons. Right? We've already talked a little bit about this. This isn't quite the 666 thing, but it's kind of in that same area, right? The demons do things to scare you, to terrify you. And they do that to kind of say, well, if you're scared of me, then you're not trusting in God. Because who has defeated the demons? This is Jesus, right? And quite frankly, if you read through the various exorcism accounts in the Gospels, there are quite a few of them. Most of the time, the demons that encounter Jesus are not, again, this isn't very exciting, right? They're not, getting ready to fight. They're going to lose, but they're going to do their best, right? And they're going to take anyone down with them that they can. No, usually when the demons encounter Jesus, they turn into sniveling little cowards, right? Think about the exorcism of the demoniac, right? This is the Gerasene who has thousands and thousands of demons, right? We are many, we are legion sort of thing, right? Sounds very exciting. Well, when Jesus shows up and says, get out, they go, oh, please don't send us back, let us go into the pigs, right? And Jesus says, fine, go into the pigs. And they run off the cliff, and it's a baptism, right? An image of baptism. Great stuff. But we also see all these demons who, as soon as Jesus shows up, they are the ones who are rightfully terrified, right? Jesus doesn't have to work hard to perform an exorcism. It is as simple as a word, right? Hey, next week, we'll sing the big hymn, right? One little word can fell him, or whatever the various translations says, right? I mean, by the way, listen to the words next week of A Mighty Fortress. That is an exorcistic hymn, as we would say. And for what it's worth, hymn 666 in our hymnal is also an exorcistic hymn. Very intentionally done. And it's a really good hymn, too. O little flock, fear not the foe. His might a joke, a mere facade. Oh, it's a great hymn. It was sung by the Swedes while they were coming down with Gustavus Adolphus to save the Lutherans' butt in the 30 Years' War. Great hymn, 666. If you're ignoring me during my sermon today, you better be reading that hymn. That's the only excuse you have. Right. So, but the sense is that the demons try to scare us. Because if we are scared of them, then we are not fearing, loving, and specifically in this case, trusting in God. And there are all sorts of ways that this can happen. We're going to talk about direct possession at the end, but that falls in that category, right? Again, think of the possessions in the Bible. We've talked about the Gerasene, the demoniac, right? He's running around naked, bound in chains, breaking chains all over the place, living in a cemetery, cutting himself. And when Jesus says, I'm going to go over there, everyone goes, don't go over there. There's a crazy person. They're all terrified of him, right? And then, interestingly enough, they're terrified of Jesus later because he's just sitting down having a chat and dinner with this guy who's now totally normal. But that's a different thing here. But the demons seek to terrify. Yes, bodily possession is part of that. But also, and this is kind of a weird area, possession of objects, right? So, and again, we don't have biblical examples of this. This is more just examples of things people have observed, right? So I'll be honest, I enjoy horror movies. Have any of you ever seen, or does the idea of a porcelain doll that moves its head around freak anyone else out? Yeah, I mean, I'm not scared of very many horror movies, but those kind of give me the creeps, right? And so, that is, and there are people who have these dolls that have claimed to be haunted. Whether they're haunted or not, I don't know, but is it possible? Well, yeah, it depends on what the demons are trying to do, and if it works, they're going to keep doing it, right? Appearing as ghosts is a place where this happens. In fact, he wasn't a professor, it's a guy writing a dissertation on this topic, did a presentation while I was at seminary, and he said, you're writing a dissertation on possession and the activities of the demons, and all sorts of stories start coming your way real fast. Who do you think, what demographic was the demographic that he received the most haunting sort of possession style accounts from? He said it wasn't even close.
Missionaries?
Not missionaries. It's the elderly. Specifically, people who have recently lost a spouse. And what they see is their spouse. And so his reaction to this was, right, you see your spouse after they've passed away, or you feel their presence or something like that. The question then becomes, what are you going to do about that? Right? And there are really two ways it can go. The one way is, their warming presence, their smiling face reminded me of the joys that we have in heaven awaiting for us, that Jesus has conquered even death. And guess what tends to happen? The spouse stops showing up. They don't see their spouse anymore. The other direction is, there's a way I can still talk to him. There's a way I can still talk to her. And so I'm going to go find a medium to help me, a psychic to help me out with that. And guess what they keep seeing? Is their spouse, right? Because they are now moving away, right? Again, what's the goal? To get you to fear, love, and trust in anything but God. If the demonic forces try something and it brings you closer to God, they're going to quit it real fast, right? Because it's doing the opposite of what they want. Because when we start giving into and leaning into these things and straying away from God, that's when these types of occurrences, whatever you want to call them, become more intensified and those sorts of things.
So I have a friend who lost her father, and he was like my favorite wrestler. I mean, I'm still upset over it. But about 2 weeks ago, she said, I can't stand it anymore. I've got to talk to him. I'm going to go see a medium. And I tried to talk to her. She went, and I was like, how? And she knows I don't believe in it. And she said, I know it was there. I believe it. And she says she believes it, but then on the other hand, she says, it just makes me feel better.
Yeah, it's probably not a good thing. So let's talk about mediums, psychics, and that sort of thing. We have, I mean, you know me in rabbit holes, we don't stand a chance today. So on the topic of mediums and psychics, here's my opinion. The vast majority of them are innocuous in the sense that nothing hokey pokey is going on with them, right? They're just people who found a way to get your money. They see themselves as entertainers, perhaps, that sort of thing. That being said, right, and our biblical example here is the Witch of Endor, right? Balaam also kind of fits into this category, right? There are those that are communing. They would not necessarily describe it this way, but they are communing, interacting with demonic forces. And those can, right, in the case of the Witch of Endor, right, Saul goes to this witch to go talk to Samuel because he's in a bind and he says, I need Samuel's advice, right? And the witch says, okay. And she, again, this is the Pastor Belinsky amplified version, right? She goes and she pulls up her demon phone book and says, all right, I'll give this one a call. And, come on up and let's go help the king, right? Oh, we get the king. And then, for whatever reason, God says, no, I'm sending the actual Samuel. And, like I said, the witch freaks out because while she was expecting someone who was pretending to be Samuel, she was expecting Samuel. That sort of thing does exist as well. Again, kind of those original pitfalls, right? These sorts of things are real. You also don't need to be terrified of them. I think I drive past 2 buildings on my commute that say psychic on the side. And I don't make crosses at them when I cross. I have I've never interacted with them in any way, so I have no idea where on this spectrum they stand. But my guess is that a lot of mediums and psychics, if they actually ran into something real, it would terrify them. Which is, again, it's all part of the goal and the plan here. Okay, questions on this before we move on?
Can Satan hear our thoughts? Can Satan give us thoughts?
No. Okay. Whenever Pastor Ricky nods after I say something I'm not 100% on, I feel better. No, Satan is not omniscient, right? So he does not know your thoughts. Probably the best way to think about this is how many of you were in your career for 20 plus years? Did you get good at what you did? Yeah, I mean, the longer you're doing something, the better you get at it. Satan's been doing this tempting thing for a minimum of 5,000 years, right? He's gotten good at it, right? And so, not that, and I hate to tell you this, right? I love each and every one of you as individuals, but you're not that unique. People are very similar, especially when it comes to sin, right? The things that tempt us are not this wide variety of, various and sundry temptations. I mean, the devil's probably got like 3 things he goes to, and that works for 99% of people, right? That thing you're thinking of right now is probably one of them, right? So, can the devil read your mind? No. I mean, how exactly the devil tempts you, what the mechanics are, I can't tell you what that is. I mean, he spoke audibly to Eve, right? We know that one. He spoke audibly to Jesus, too. But where exactly these temptations fall and how they fall on the spectrum, the mechanics, we're not told, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. You have something to add to that, Joe? By any chance?
He doesn't have to work very hard.
Right, yeah, I think that's
He knows what human beings are made of.
Right.
He knows our behavior patterns. It's easy.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, there's It's a great book. I really recommend reading it, but once you're done reading it, come talk to me because some weird things happen in this book. It's The Life of Saint Anthony by Athanasius. Yes, that Athanasius. It's about one of the original OG monks who does a lot of active spiritual warfare, right? In the account of his life, he literally fights demons in a tomb for like a month. Like I said, come talk to me after. Weird stuff happens in this book. But The Life of Saint Anthony, or Anthony, whether you put an H there depends on how you're transliterating certain letters, sort of thing. It's by Athanasius. I mean, it's thousands of years old, or it's not thousands. It's more than one, though, so it's a public source. You can get it. Even the translation is a couple hundred years old.
Can a normal person?
Yeah. Understand it? Yeah, Athanasius is a great writer as long as he's not writing against the Arians. He's very easy to understand. Like I said, just come talk to me after when you're done because weird stuff happens. One of the things, the reason I bring this up is Antony near the end of his life is teaching about Satan and the demons and all those sorts of things. And he gives all these he has this weird vision, which again, we don't need to get into, but he starts talking about how, it's like, again, this is my summarized version of it. He kind of says, you guys know Satan's not everywhere, right? He goes, in fact, and of course he has many examples of a time when a saint looks near death. And Satan sees that. He goes and runs around Egypt, in this case, that's where Anthony lived, and he tells everyone that the saint is dead, right? But God has healed that saint, and he has told you far before the devil can even get to you that saint is fine, and then the devil looks a fool. This sort of thing, right? So the reason I bring this up is the devil's not everywhere. He is not omniscient. He's not all-powerful, right? And none of the angels or demons are, for that matter, right? And so again, if you're going to fear, love, and trust in anyone, the good money is on God, because he's going to win every time. Satan is a created being, just like you. Now, he's different than you, but he is a part of creation, just like we are. Yes?
We have one in our attic.
What's that?
A demon or spirit.
What's that?
Squirrels.
What makes you say that?
What makes you say that? Sheep? Oh, wait, confusing? Is that what you said?
Well, thank you at the very least for the excellent transition here. Did you know that in the Lutheran liturgy we have an exorcism of a house? It's not nearly as excitingly titled. It's just the blessing of the home. But part of the blessing of the home is get out, Satan. I don't think it's phrased quite like that. It's probably more flowery liturgical language. But we do have an exorcistic style liturgy for the blessing of a home. For what it's worth, we also have an exorcistic style liturgy for people, and that is, thank you, baptism, right? And this is really, how many of you were there for Violet's baptism? Because we have two baptismal liturgies. One of them is the one we always use, and the other one is Luther's, which starts out with very clearly an exorcism. Get out of this person, Satan. And so here I am, the pastor with a kid, and on the morning that Violet was being baptized, I was talking with Pastor Jordan about it. I said, I got to do that one day. You don't come up to the new parents and say, can I cast Satan out of your beautiful baby child? I mean, you could, but you're probably going to get weird looks. And so I called Lauren. She's like on the way. I said, Lauren, can I exorcise our child before baptism? And she said, yes! And so we got to do Luther's liturgy for the baptism. It was awesome. It was so cool. We got to do that one. But, while that one is a bit more explicit in the language, right? We do talk about all the sin in them would be drowned and died, right? All the hold that Satan has on this child, which Satan has a hold on every child that comes out of the womb, right? Every child born in sin is born under the tyranny of Satan. Right? I mean, we know these Bible passages, right? We just tend not to think about them in these terms, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But all children born are born under the power of sin, death, and the devil. And baptism is kicking the devil out. It's also painting a target on their back, but that's a different thing, right? Because, well, man, that's a possession sign, which we're not going to get to this week. But we put God in there, the devil gets kicked out. So baptism is an exorcistic part of the liturgy. In fairness, so is the Lord's Prayer, the invocation. If you want to look at our liturgy through the lens of an exorcism, there's a lot of places. For what it's worth, well, no, actually, that won't get us too far afield. Look at that. I saw a rabbit hole, I avoided it. It never happens.
What about Ouija boards, tarot cards, crystals, voodoo dolls? Because there's been times I wish I had a voodoo doll that I could stick pins in.
I was going to say, didn't you spend time in New Orleans? Okay, so all those sorts of things, like Ouija boards, tarot cards, voodoo dolls, and you had another one. Crystals.
There's a shop up there on
There are lots of shops. I mean, the rocks are pretty, but that's about it. Again, I think right to the Ouija boards you buy at Target, because apparently they're in the game section, if you didn't know, Hasbro Ouija board. On the one hand, are they inherently demonic? No. On the other hand, how many of you have seen The Exorcist? That is actually based on a real story. The exorcism actually began at my seminary.
Right.
You can go to it's great. You get on the tour, you get in the tour, and you go to Luther's Tower, and you do this with high schoolers and middle schoolers, right? And you're in the chapel of the apostles at the seminary, and you say, below us, if any of you have seen The Exorcism, is where they began to do the exorcism on the young man, who was male in real life, but now no one's allowed in there. And that's because that's where the personal records are kept, so they keep the door locked and 3 people have a key. There's nothing to do with that. You don't tell the high schoolers that, right? You got to spook them a little bit. But that is a real, verifiable story. It didn't happen the way it did in the movie. Actually, in some ways, the movie's a little bit more tame than some of the crazy things that happen. There's a lot of occult stuff going on. That's a whole other story for another day. But that all started with a Ouija board. The real life version, and I think in the movie as well, all started with the Ouija board. Because, what you don't want to do is just put an open invitation for these sorts of things, right? Better safe than sorry with these sorts of things, right? Go ahead.
When I was a child, me and another guy tried the Ouija board, and I asked the question, what made it work? And it spelled out the devil.
Did you play with the Ouija board again?
No.
Yep. That's good, right? That's right. Now, for what it's worth, Ouija boards, if you do want to know the functionality, we have verified cognitive processes that are, if you put a whole bunch of people and put their hands on something and tell no one to move, the thing is going to go crazy. Because everyone's trying to correct for everyone else, and there's subconscious stuff going on. So we know why Ouija boards do what they do, but there could also be some demonic stuff going on. Just stay away from them.
Few of us weren't making devil at that age.
Well, I'm not saying that you were, right? Let me say this clearly, right? This stuff is real, right? So just because we have scientific papers that explain how this tends to work doesn't mean that's not how it always works. So, stay away from those sorts of things.
What about the so-called deliverance ministry that went on?
I would need to know more about that one in particular. What I thought, and this might help, when you said tarot cards, I don't know if any of you know this, but there's a subset of Christians who do Christian tarot cards. They're not Christian. That's a problem with the third commandment, right? That's reading omens. Don't do that, right? That sort of thing. But there are attempts by Christians and others to bring in New Age, occult type things into Christianity. The proclaimed reason for the Christian tarot cards is to reach the New Agers, right? They're not really tarot cards. They're not really even Christian tarot cards, right? They're just pictures of Jesus on the cross, and that's how we get them, right? That's how we get to talk to them. But then there are videos of hidden cameras and things where people go in pretending to be unbelievers and weird stuff. Weird things are said. So we don't need guys, we got the word and the sacraments. We don't need to be doing tarot cards and stuff. We got better stuff. We don't need to get all weirdo glitz and glam. I would need to know more specifically about the deliverance ministry to be able to speak on that one in particular. Yeah, stick with word and sacraments, right? Just in general, right? How has God promised to do his thing? It's the proclamation of the word and the right administration of the sacraments, right? That's where you find God. You don't need to go looking into all sorts of strange places.
All the way back in Deuteronomy, Moses throws in the line, the hidden things belong to God. What he's revealed, that's for us.
Right, yeah. And God knows way more than you guys do. God knows way more than he's told us, right? I mean, how often have you heard Pastor Jordan or I or Ed, all sorts of other people say, God just hasn't told us that. There are all sorts of questions. Some of them really big, some of them small, where the answer is, God just hasn't told us. Why? I don't know. God has chosen not to tell us. In fact, the closest we get to an answer as to why God hasn't told us that is the one time where someone complained, said, God, you've hidden something from me, and I demand an answer. And do you know how it went for him? Well, this is Job, right? He and his friends are complaining for like 48 chapters, right? Everyone reads like the first 3 chapters and the last 3 chapters of Job. The middle is lots of complaining. This is the short version, right? God answers Job and says, hey, Job, where were you when I made the earth? Where were you when I put the oceans in place? Like, tell me if you know how I did that, let alone where you are. And the end point is, Job, I'm God. I can tell you what I want to tell you, and I can keep what I want to keep. You don't get to know, right? Stop complaining, which is always a fun answer, but it is what it is. And Job praises God at the end. Says, all right, God, you have your way. And for a little bit of hope in all things, Job did not sin. So we do know that. We're actually going to talk about Job again later in this class, which I will say I know what time it is. And Pastor Jordan has given me another week if I need it. So we'll come back to this class because none of you are interested in this at all, are you? All right, so the terror of the demons, exorcism of home. Okay, so on the one hand we have the terror of the demons. On the other hand we have apathy of the demonic, right? So there is a very large population of people, especially in Western civilization, where if you run down Karen's list, go, you don't really believe in any of that stuff, do you, right? And there's a part where we should do that as well, but there's also, right, we're in between two things here, right? Do crystals have power? No, they don't. They're rocks. I mean, some of them, you can run electrical currents through. Crystals can do cool things, but they're not mystical, right? Could the devil use, something? Could the devil do something? Blame it on the crystal. Like a good thing, right? Seemingly a good thing, right? Blame it on the crystal or whatever you're doing with the crystal, and all of a sudden you go, ooh, this crystal can do awesome things. I don't need to go to church anymore. Bread and wine? That's boring. I got that and it tastes better at home, right? Oh, crystal, now that's cool, right? And now we are fearing, loving, and trusting in something other than God. On the other hand, we can go so far the other direction and go, oh, I don't believe in any of that mumbo jumbo. And by the way, you Christians are just as bad. You think Jesus shows up on the altar? It's like, no, none of that kind of stuff happens, right? And now we're going the other way, right? So again, we're running in the middle of these two things. Another means through which Satan accomplishes his goals, we've actually talked about this one quite a bit, is to get you to focus on something else, specifically in this case, something else ethereal, right? This is the ghosts, New Age, spiritualism sort of stuff, right? The things that the people out in California do, right? And tell Pastor Jordan I said that too. It happens a lot in California. It does, like I said, I drive past 2 psychics on the way here, and if I drive a different way, I can drive past more psychics. So it's not like it's only in California. That's just where a lot of it is congregating. Questions on any of that? Because if we pause here, that's okay. If not, we can go through one more chunk. But I want to, if there are any other questions on this. All right. So 2 other means that the devil uses are physical and spiritual attacks. The physical attacks, right? This is loss of property or health, destruction of well-being or family. Job, like I said, Job's going to come up again. This is it. Job was engaged in spiritual warfare. The devil took everything away from him, right? Now, we do need to wrangle another time with the fact that God said he could, right? And that's Job's question. Why? Why did you let the devil do this? And God says, you don't get to know that. That is a form of spiritual attack. Now, does that mean that everyone in Florida whose house got hit by Hurricane Ian and got flooded, the devil attacked them with that flood? No, that's not what we want to say either. So how do I know which people in Florida, their house was attacked by the devil and an attack on their physical property? I don't worry about that, right? Where the rubber meets the road is when the property's gone, human care needs to go in and help them, right? That's where the alert teams, chainsaws at the ready, some of the stuff, that kind of thing, right? It doesn't matter if that house was flooded because Satan, poked a hole in the bottom of the house, or if a hurricane came through and just buried it in water, right? That doesn't matter, at least for our purposes. But we do want to recognize that kind of stuff happens, and we'll kind of just leave it at that. The spiritual attacks, however, are probably the more significant here. The spiritual attacks, I'm just going to run down a list, and then if we need to spend any time with anything, we can. Although my guess is you will recognize all of these. Temptation to sin, classic devil sin, right? Callousness towards the sins, right? If you were at the early service, where we kind of dealt with this a little bit, right? The fifth commandment stuff. Hating someone isn't really a sin, right? Me getting mad at that guy who cut me off in traffic, that's not a fifth commandment problem. It may not be good, but it's not fifth commandment kind of stuff. Well, you got to get callous on your heart there. You got to take that off, right? So saying something that is a sin is not. That's our callousness towards sin. This is a big temptation for us. It's really easy for us to excuse ourselves because again, the devil finds a very willing partner in our sinful flesh, and if he can get you to just excuse the sin, and say, "Oh, well, that's not really sinful," well, that's problematic. Despair of forgiveness. Right? This is how could God forgive you? Look at what you did. Right? Think Judas. Right? I don't think we have. Well, we do know that Judas was harried by devils. Don't know if this is exactly what it was, but right? How could God forgive Judas for what he did? Right? Well, we also see the counterpart, the corollary. How could God forgive Peter? Peter's forgiven. Judas would have been forgiven. And we can very confidently say that, right? Jesus died for Judas too. But Judas, no matter what else you can say about what was going on with his cognitive state, which must have been a nightmare, he despaired of forgiveness. Right? You will never forgive me for this. I can't be forgiven for what I've done. That temptation, while maybe not as dramatic as the one that Judas faced, comes to all of us. Right? I can't be forgiven for the thing I've done. It's too bad. It's too repetitive, whatever it is. Doubt in general. Doubt is a spiritual attack, right? How can you really believe this sort of thing? Exploitation of mental and other illnesses. We're going to talk about this the next time we come back to this topic, when we talk about possession more specifically. But let me say, again, our two objects here. Demonic possession exists. Mental illness exists, right? What we do not want to say is, oh, there's no such thing as schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, any of these sorts of things. Those are all just people who are possessed. No, that is clinically untrue, right? Demonic possession does sometimes present itself in similar ways, which we'll talk about this when we talk about demonic possession in particular. Makes it kind of difficult for us. But mental illness is a very, very real thing, right? If you've heard nothing else I've said today, mental illness is a real thing. That being said, mental and physical illnesses, what a time that you are exposed, right? When you're lying in the hospital bed, and you're not recovering from the surgery the way you're wanting to, and the devil comes in and starts attacking you, right? Bringing all these sorts of doubts, right? So the devil can exploit these sorts of situations in our life. They just become more vulnerable areas. Doesn't mean that the physical or mental illness is not real. It just means the devil can, not always, but can come in and start attacking where the armor's weak, if you will. And last, as I've spoken about before, is making an alliance with our sinful flesh. Right? That's what the devil loves to do, and we love to do it. Real quick, how do you fight back? Well, you fight against sin through confession and absolution. Right? All those doubts of forgiveness come here. I'll tell you again at the late service, doesn't matter if you're at the early, I'll tell you that God forgives you of your sins, and He means it. Also through mortifying of the flesh. Right? The more you don't sin, the more you fight against temptation, the easier it becomes. Now, this doesn't mean you're going to escape sin at some point, but perhaps that sin, right, that popped into your brain right now, through mortification of the flesh, confession, absolution, through constantly struggling against that sin, maybe it gets toned down. That's how we fight against sin. And, by the way, all of our ability to mortify the flesh comes from Christ and what He is doing in and through us. We fight against the power of death through trusting in the power of the resurrection. Right? What better confession in the face of death and the terror of death than this body will rise? Right? We're not afraid of death. Death is sleep. Doesn't mean we like it, but we don't need to be afraid of it. We fight against the devil through faith, through trust in the Word, and through prayer. Right? Going to church is probably a good one in there too. Right? But that kind of fits on all of these. So, questions on any of these, the spiritual warfare half of your handout? All right, so we will finish there. I don't know exactly when we will take on the back half of this worksheet, which is the one you were all waiting for anyway. Although we've dealt with some of the topics that will come up. I don't know exactly when that will happen, but it will be fairly soon that we will cover demonic possession and all that really exciting stuff. So, let us close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, thank you, everyone. If you haven't been at church yet, I'll see you there. Yes, please. Thank you. Please, we need all the tables put up, away.